And the sad fact is, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, 8,000 Marines are going to sweep into Fallujah. People from units that I used to serve with, men who I have the highest respect for. And they're going to sweep into that city thinking that they can pacify this city, thinking that they can, by the point of a bayonet or by the bullet, convince 500,000 Iraqi civilians that their presence in Iraq is justified and that the Iraqis must approve of this presence. And many of these Marines are going to die. Many of them are going to be wounded. All of them are going to see things that are going to scar them for life. And let's not forget about the Iraqis. Hundreds of Iraqis are going to die, maybe thousands. Many families are going to be disrupted, homes destroyed, property lost. And for what reason? We speak the language of democracy in Iraq, but as I said, there's nothing democratic taking place. We have an American dictator dictating to an Iraqi governing council that was not selected by the Iraqi people, but handpicked by the American dictator. 60% of the Iraqi governing council is drawn from a pool of individuals who have not resided in Iraq for decades, who have no constituency in Iraq. Constituency is an important term because that's one of those terms we use in relationship to democracies. Constituencies elect representatives who govern in their name. And the Iraqi governing council lacks a constituency in Iraq other than the American military, which is there in violation of international law. Now we have an American military that dictates a constitution to the Iraqi people. It was not formed by a constitutional convention, the likes of what we saw in the formative years of the American Republic, where elected representatives came together and hashed out the future of a nation and put it down in writing. That's not what occurred. This was dictated to the Iraqis by the American dictator. And yet we speak about bringing democracy to Iraq. There hasn't been an election in Iraq. And there won't be an election in Iraq for any time in the foreseeable future. In fact, my prediction is you will never see an election in Iraq because Iraq is going to explode into civil war that will prevent an election from taking place. And a civil war will only result in more Americans dying. And it seems that the more Americans that get killed in Iraq, the more resolve the Bush administration has to stay the course in Iraq. At what point in time will they figure out that they made a mistake and that they need to change direction? And the answer to that, ladies and gentlemen, is they will never figure this out. So I'm putting the challenge to you right now. When we talk about threats to the security of the United States of America, and you turn on the TV, you'll hear people talk about Iraq. You'll hear people talk about terrorism. You'll hear talk about Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. But I'm telling you right now, the greatest threat to the United States of America is the administration of George W. Bush. Now, we are in a struggle. We're in a struggle today. It's a struggle that's not being fought in Iraq. It's not being fought in Afghanistan. It's not being fought in Madrid. It's not being fought globally. It's being fought right here in these United States. It's a battle for the future of these United States. If George W. Bush gets reelected, the American Republic that we love and cherish will be mortally wounded. We cannot survive another 4 years of George W. Bush. This is a man who has fundamentally deviated from the Constitution of the United States, the document which defines who we are and what we are as a people. The values and ideals that we cherish as a collective are enshrined in that document. And yet that document does not govern the direction of George W. Bush's administration. There are two documents that do. When one speaks of domestic policy, understand that it is the Patriot Act that is the guiding light for the Bush administration. And the Patriot Act is widely acknowledged by lawyers as representing a frontal assault on the Constitution of the United States. Now, if one wants to speak about how we interact with the rest of the world, we would like to say that it's through the United Nations Charter, a document that we have signed, a document that has been ratified by the Senate, a document that is part of the American body of law. But that's not it. It's the national security strategy of the Bush administration that represents how we interact. It speaks of American unilateral intervention. It speaks of the United States using its overwhelming economic and military power to impose our will where we see fit, regardless of international law, regardless of notions of multilateralism. Now, a lot of people say, well, international law, including the president, who cares? But when you say that, you're ignorant. Because when you say that, you're saying you don't care about the Constitution of the United States, because international law, as currently formulated by the United Nations Charter, is the supreme law of the land. I don't care if you like it or not. That's irrelevant, because that's what the case is. That's what the reality is. If we don't like this, then we tell the Senate to withdraw from the United Nations Charter so that we are not operating in violation of law. But we live in a land of law, a nation of laws, where the rule of law means everything. We don't allow people to deviate from the rule of law. Why should we allow our government to do so? Ladies and gentlemen, we are faced with a crisis of immense proportions. As I said, the very future of our country depends on how we, the people of the United States of America, respond to this challenge in the 7 months we have left before the election in November. And I have to tell you right now, my report card is that we have a failing grade. And again, your heart's in the right place. My heart's in the right place. We're not getting this message out to mainstream America. And we have to ask why. And it's not sufficient for us to sit here and criticize the media. That may be a good reason why we're not doing so. But sitting back and criticizing the media will not solve the problem. We have to stop speaking about the problem, and we have to start coming up with solutions. And we have to speak of coming up with solutions now. What are you going to do in the next 7 months to get the rest of this country to wake up to the fact that we will no longer exist as a democratic republic if we vote Bush back into office? That's a challenge that everyone in this room needs to leave this building tonight and look in the mirror, look themselves in the mirror and say, what am I going to do about that? What are we going to do about that? We have a good message. It's a sound message. It's one that's just. It's one that should be embraced by Americans. But for some reason, we're not getting that message out. We're not interfacing with the rest of this country appropriately. They're not buying into our message. Why not? Well, because they're ignorant. Because they're ignorant, and from ignorance comes fear. And that fear is being exploited by the Bush administration. We have a liar as president. There is no doubt about this. And I don't think too many Americans even debate that anymore. I mean, I can go to organizations like the American Legion and say, the president lied about weapons of mass destruction. They'll say, yeah, but, Saddam was a bad guy. The ends justify the means. The second you hear somebody throw up the ends justify the means argument, you must stare them in the face and say, you don't deserve the title American citizen. Because an American citizen can never tolerate the notion of the ends justify the means. That's something that a German citizen in the 1930s could tolerate. That's something that an American can never tolerate, because the ends cannot justify the means, because that means we are no longer about a nation of law. We're no longer about the Constitution. We're no longer about values and ideals. We're about bullies getting away with anything they want, as long as they deem it to be proper. The ends justify the means. Why do we get away with an ends justify the means mentality? Because we have a nation that doesn't operate under the concepts of democracy anymore. We operate under what I call the concept of the theocracy of evil. You see, we view the world in black and white. Why? Because we're ignorant of the world. We have 260 million people, the majority of whom never leave this country. They don't have passports. They don't know what exists across the Atlantic Ocean. They don't know what exists across the Pacific Ocean. Many of them don't know what exists just down south in Mexico or up north in Canada. They're stuck in their hometown, comfortable in the life that they've been given and blessed with as Americans, And they've forgotten what it means to be a citizen, not only of this country, but of the world. And then